For 800 years, the most powerful man who ever lived has been hiding in plain sight, somewhere beneath the grasslands of Mongolia, and not one single person alive knows exactly where. Not archaeologists with satellites, not the Mongolian government, not the descendants who still carry his bloodline in nearly 1 out of every 200 men on Earth today. Genghis Khan conquered more territory than any human being in history, built an empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the doorstep of Europe, and then, when he died, simply vanished. No monument marks his grave, no inscription bears his name, and for centuries, treasure hunters, emperors, Soviet scientists, and modern explorers, armed with satellites and ground-penetrating radar, have tried to find him. Every single one of them has failed. This is the story of why. To understand why his burial became one of history's greatest secrets, you first have to understand who this man was and what he built. He was born around 1162 in the Khenti, mountains of northeastern Mongolia, given the name Temujin, and his childhood was nothing like the destiny that awaited him. His father was poisoned by rival tribesmen when Temujin was still a boy, and his family was abandoned by their own clan, left to survive on roots, marmots, and fish along the riverbanks. He grew up in poverty and danger, at one point enslaved by a rival clan, at one point hiding from enemies in the very mountains, where legend later placed his tomb. Out of that brutal childhood came a man who would unite the fractured, warring tribes of the Mongolians, step into a single nation, and then turn that nation into the most feared military force the world had ever seen. By the time he took the title Genghis Khan, meaning something close to a universal ruler, in 1206, he commanded a confederation of tribes that had spent generations fighting each other. Within 2 decades, his armies had shattered the Western Jia kingdom, crushed the Jin dynasty in northern China, and torn through the Khwarezmian Empire in Central Asia with a speed and ferocity that emptied entire cities. Historians estimate his conquests may have caused the deaths of tens of millions of people, a demographic catastrophe so severe that some researchers argue it measurably cooled the planet's climate, because so much farmland was abandoned and reclaimed by forest. Yet, alongside the devastation, he built something remarkable. He established one of the first international postal relay systems, guaranteed religious tolerance across his empire at a time when much of the world was killing over faith, protected merchants and diplomats under a code of law called the Yasa, and helped open the trade corridors that would come to be known as the Silk Road. By the time of his death, his empire covered roughly 12 million square miles, nearly a quarter of the entire inhabited world. And then, in August of 1227, the man who had never lost a war disappeared from the historical record almost overnight. We know the year of his death with reasonable confidence. We do not know exactly how he died, and that uncertainty alone tells you something about how carefully the Mongols guarded information about their leader in his final days. The most detailed near-contemporary source, a chronicle known as the Secret History of the Mongols, records the year of his death, but offers no explanation of the cause, an extraordinary silence for a document otherwise packed with detail about his life and campaigns. Later, writers filled that silence with competing theories. Marco Polo, writing decades afterward, said little about the death itself, but confirmed that even by his time, the Mongols would not reveal where their great Khans were buried. Persian historian Rashid al-Din, writing within a lifetime of the event, suggested Genghis Khan died from complications following a fall from his horse during a hunt. Chinese sources from the Ming Dynasty's official history of the Yuan claimed illness took him during the final campaign against the Western Jia, and a persistent, far more dramatic legend first recorded generatio. NS later claimed a captured Western Jia princess killed him during their wedding night in revenge for the destruction of her people using a hidden blade. Modern historians treat that last story with heavy skepticism, since it appears nowhere in the earliest sources and reads more like folklore designed to give a defiant ending to a conquered people's story. What nearly every serious historian agrees on is this: he died somewhere near the Liupan Mountains in what is now China's Ningxia region, most likely from illness or injury related to his final military campaign, at roughly 65 years old, still leading troops in the field. What happened next is where history gives way almost entirely to legend, because the Mongols made an extraordinary decision. They chose to erase every trace of where their emperor's body would come to rest. According to multiple oral traditions recorded over the following centuries, his body was carried back toward his homeland in the Khenti Mountains in complete secrecy. To prevent word from spreading, the funeral procession reportedly killed anyone they encountered along the route: farmers, herders, travelers, anyone who might later reveal which direction the caravan had traveled. Once the burial was complete, the soldiers who had dug the grave and carried out the ceremony were themselves killed, according to the legend, by a second group of soldiers assigned specifically for that purpose. Those soldiers, in turn, are said to have taken their own lives or been killed as well, closing every link in the chain of people who might know the location. Historian Jack Weatherford, one of the foremost modern scholars of Genghis Khan, has been blunt about these particular stories, stating plainly that none of it is based on a shred of actual evidence. They are legends, repeated for centuries because they are dramatic and because they explain an otherwise inexplicable silence, but they are not verified historical fact. What is better documented, or at least more consistently repeated across multiple independent sources, is what happened to the burial site itself once the body was interred. According to tradition, 1,000 horses were driven back and forth over the burial ground repeatedly, trampling the earth until any sign of a disturbed grave was erased, and the land looked identical to the surrounding steppe. Some versions of the story claim a forest was deliberately planted over the site to camouflage it permanently, while other tellings describe an entire river being temporarily diverted, so that his coffin could be placed beneath the riverbed itself, after which the water was allowed to flow back over the top, sealing the grave beneath. The permanent moving barrier no shovel could easily penetrate. Even Kublai Khan, his own grandson and the man who would go on to found the Yuan dynasty in China, reportedly did not know the tomb's exact location, a detail that, if true, meant the secret was kept even from the family that inherited his empire. There was, however, one clue the Mongols themselves left behind, not through carelessness, but through reverence. According to the secret history of the Mongols, our oldest and most trusted surviving account of his life, Genghis Khan had a deeply personal connection to a specific mountain called Burkhan Khaldun, located in the Kinti range of northeastern Mongolia. As a young man fleeing enemies who wanted him dead, Temujin hid on that mountain and survived, and in gratitude, he is recorded as having declared it sacred, vowing to worship it for the rest of his life and asking that his descendants do the same. Multiple historical traditions state that he expressed a wish later in life to be buried somewhere on or near that mountain. It is the single strongest lead historians and archaeologists have ever had, and it has shaped nearly every serious search effort for the past century. That reverence for Burkhan Khaldun did not fade with his death. The region surrounding the mountain was designated Ich Korig, meaning the Great Taboo or the Great Forbidden Zone, and for centuries it was protected first by imperial guards under the Mongol Khans and later by armed patrols under subsequent Mongolian authorities. Entry was forbidden. Hunting, logging, farming, mining, and even the construction of roads or religious structures were banned within its boundaries. This wasn't casual folklore. It was enforced policy, maintained across dynasties and political systems for the better part of 8 centuries, which is itself almost unheard of in world history. Even today, the core area around Burkhan Khaldun remains a strictly protected site under Mongolian law, and in 2015, UNESCO added the mountain and its surrounding landscape to the World Heritage List specifically because of its cultural and spiritual significance as the birthplace and presumed burial region of Genghis Khan. The reasoning behind all this secrecy comes down to Mongolian spiritual belief at the time, rooted in a shamanistic tradition often referred to as Tengrism, centered on the eternal blue sky and the sanctity of the natural landscape. Disturbing the rest and G-place of a great leader was believed to disturb his spirit and threaten the fortunes of his descendants and his empire. There was also a very practical fear layered underneath the spiritual one. An empire built through conquest inevitably makes enemies, and a known grave is a vulnerable grave, subject to looting for the treasure it might contain or desecration as an act of political revenge by a defeated rival. Concealing the tomb protected both his soul in the Mongol worldview and his legacy in the very real world of Eurasian power politics. For centuries after his death, the secret held. Then, as archaeology matured into a modern science and outside interest in the Mongol Empire grew, the search for the tomb began in earnest, and it has continued in one form or another for well over 100 years. Russian explorer G.N. Potanin conducted early expeditions into Mongolia in the late 19th century and gathered local testimony about the burial legends, though he found no physical evidence. During the 20th century, the Soviet Union, which exercised heavy political influence over Mongolia for decades, sponsored several expeditions to the Kinti region, driven partly by genuine scientific curiosity and partly by the geopolitical prestige that would come with such a discovery. Access to Mongolia during this period was tightly restricted to outsiders, which paradoxically helped preserve the Forbidden Zone from looters, even as it limited legitimate archaeological research. One of the most significant breakthroughs came in 2004, when a joint Japanese and Mongolian archaeological team working near the town of Avarga in Kinti province uncovered what they believed to be the ruins of Genghis Khan's palace complex. This was a genuinely major discovery, not a fabricated headline. Historical texts had referenced officials traveling daily between the Khan, Hesi Palace, and his burial site to perform ongoing rituals in his honor, which meant the palace's location offered a real geographic anchor point that archaeologists had never had before. Excitement spread through the archaeological community that the tomb itself might finally be within reach. located somewhere within a reasonable distance of the palace ruins. But despite that promising lead, extensive follow-up surveys of the surrounding area failed to locate any burial site, and the trail went cold once again. Independent researchers took up the hunt as well. American amateur archaeologist Maury Kravitz became one of the most dedicated tomb hunters of the 20th century, spending roughly 40 years and a substantial personal fortune pursuing leads near Burkhan Khaldun before his death in 2012 without ever confirming the tomb's location. America. An adventurer and explorer, Alan Nichols spent decades studying the region as well, famously telling journalists, half joking and half serious, that he could reveal the location but would have to shoot them afterward. A comment that captures just how mythologized the search had become even among the people conducting it seriously. The most technologically ambitious search effort arrived in 2009, led by Dr. Albert Yu-Min Lin, a research scientist affiliated with the University of California, San Diego, and supported by the National Geographic Society. Rather than sending teams to physically dig across thousands of square miles of protected, sacred terrain, Lin took a fundamentally different approach that respected the region's cultural and legal restrictions while still pushing the search forward. His project, known as the Valley of the Khans, used ultra-high-resolution satellite imagery from the GOI-1 satellite, KEP, able of resolving objects less than half a meter across, to scan more than 2,000 square miles of the Khenti Mountains without a single shovel touching the ground. Because manually reviewing that volume of imagery was far beyond what any research team could accomplish alone, Lin's team built a crowdsourcing platform that opened the satellite images to the public. Over the following years, more than 10,000 online volunteers spent a combined 30,000 hours scanning 6,000 square kilometers of terrain, tagging more than 2 million potential features of interest. Machine learning algorithms then cross-referenced where large numbers of independent volunteers had flagged the same unusual features, generating a probability map of locations worth further investigation on the ground. The results were genuinely significant, even though the tomb itself remained elusive. Ground surveys guided by the crowdsourced data confirmed 55 previously unknown archaeological sites across the region, including ancient burial mounds, settlement remains, and structures that added meaningfully to our understanding of Mongolian history, none of which had been documented before the project began. What the team did not find, and made a deliberate decision not to pursue further, even where anomalies appeared near Burkhan Khaldun itself, was any confirmed trace of Genghis Khan's own grave. Lin has spoken publicly about the ethical weight of that decision. The mountain remains one of the most sacred sites in Mongolian culture, and out of respect for local spiritual beliefs and Mongolian law protecting the area, his team deliberately avoided any invasive excavation near the most sacred core of the Forbidden Zone, choosing to let the science stop exactly where the culture asked it to. Ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive geophysical scanning technologies have also been used in various expeditions across the decades, capable in theory of detecting disturbed earth, buried chambers, or man-made structures beneath the surface without any digging at all. So far, none of these efforts, whether run by Mongolian institutions, Japanese archaeological teams, Soviet-era Russian expeditions, or American-led scientific projects, has produced confirmed physical evidence of the tomb. Every claimed lead, and there have been several over the decades, from supposed inscriptions to rumored local sightings of ancient structures, has eventually failed to hold up under closer scientific scrutiny. It's worth clarifying something that causes enormous confusion online, especially in sensationalized headlines. There is a well-known site in Inner Mongolia, in China, called the Genghis Khan Mausoleum, an impressive complex of buildings that draws large numbers of tourists every year and features what are presented as relics associated with the Khan. This is not, and has never been claimed by serious scholars to be, his actual burial site. It functions as a memorial and cenotaph, a symbolic monument built to honor his memory constructed centuries after his death and relocated multiple times throughout its history, including once during the Second World War to protect it from Japanese forces, and again later for political reasons under Chinese communist rule. Historians and Mongolian cultural authorities are consistent and clear on this point. The mausoleum is a place of veneration, not a place of burial, and conflating the two has fueled a great deal of the misinformation that circulates about this topic. So why, after more than a century of dedicated searching, using tools ranging from horseback expeditions to orbital satellites, has nobody succeeded? Several factors compound each other in a way that makes this an unusually difficult archaeological problem. Mongolia is one of the largest countries in the world by land area and simultaneously one of the least densely populated, with vast stretches of steppe, mountain, and forest that remain almost entirely without roads or permanent settlement. The specific region? Historians believe most likely to contain the tomb, centered on Burkhan Khaldun, spans hundreds of square miles of genuinely difficult terrain, thick forest, rocky slopes, and in places, permafrost, ground that remains frozen year-round and can make excavation extraordinarily difficult even when a target location is known. Some traditions specifically claim the Mongols chose a burial location precisely because the permafrost would help seal and preserve the site indefinitely, adding a layer of natural concealment on top of the deliberate human efforts to hide it. Layered onto the physical challenge is the legal and cultural one, since the most promising search area has been a strictly protected, internationally recognized heritage site for centuries, closed to excavation both by Mongolian law and by the deep cultural conviction of the Mongolian people that the site should remain undisturbed. That last point deserves real emphasis, because it is arguably the most important reason the tomb has never been found, more important than any technological limitation. Mongolian cultural and religious tradition holds that disturbing this particular ground would be a profound desecration, and that belief is not a relic of the distant past. It is actively held and enforced by the modern Mongolian government and its people today. Local rangers still patrol the boundaries of the Ik-Korig zone. Mongolian archaeologists have generally supported research that maps and studies the surrounding landscape while drawing a firm line against any excavation that would physically disturb ground believed to be the resting place of their nation's founder. This creates a genuinely unusual situation in the world of archaeology, where the technology to search more aggressively largely exists, but the ethical and legal will to use it in the most sensitive areas does not, and arguably should not. There's also a real possibility, one that serious historians take seriously rather than dismissing, that no single, findable tomb exists in the way popular imagination pictures it. Mongol burial customs for centuries before Genghis Khan's rise often did not involve permanent marked structures at all. For much of Mongol history, the dead, including Li of considerable status, were sometimes left exposed to the elements and to scavenging animals in accordance with certain nomadic traditions, rather than being placed in a sealed chamber the way settled agricultural civilizations typically buried their rulers. If Genghis Khan's remains were treated similarly, even with layers of ceremony and secrecy added given his unique status, there may be no grand chamber filled with gold and weapons waiting to be discovered, no matter how sophisticated the search technology becomes. This possibility does not diminish the historical importance of the search, but it does temper the popular expectation, fed by decades of documentaries and speculative articles, that discovery is simply a matter of time and sufficiently advanced equipment. What would it actually mean if the tomb were ever found, ethically and archaeologically? Historians describe it as a discovery that would rank alongside the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb or the unearthing of the Terracotta Army, a genuinely once-in-a-generation event capable of reshaping our understanding of Mongol religious practice, funerary customs, and the material culture of the empire at its height. It could resolve lingering historical debates about the cause of his death, confirm or dispel centuries of legend, and provide an unbroken physical link to one of the most consequential individuals in human history. But that same significance is exactly why so many scholars, Mongolian and international alike, argue that even if the location were somehow determined with certainty, excavation might never be the appropriate response. Respecting the wishes of the culture that has protected this site for 8 centuries may matter more than satisfying outside curiosity, however historically valuable that curiosity might be. In the meantime, the search itself continues to evolve even without a breakthrough. Newer generations of satellite imagery offer sharper resolution than the systems used in Lin's original project. Advances in machine learning and pattern recognition, far more sophisticated now than the crowdsourced tagging systems of the early 2010s, are increasingly capable of identifying subtle anomalies in terrain that the human eye would miss entirely. LiDAR mapping, which uses laser pulses to reveal ground features hidden beneath dense forest canopy, a technology that has already revolutionized the study of lost cities in places like Central America and Southeast Asia, offers a genuinely promising, minimally invasive path forward that could one day map the entire Khanty region in extraordinary detail without disturbing a single square foot of sacred ground. It is entirely possible that within the coming decades, researchers will be able to say with real confidence where the tomb likely lies, using nothing but light bounced from an aircraft or satellite far above the forest canopy, all while never breaking ground at all. What makes this story remarkable in the end is not simply that a powerful man's grave has never been found. Plenty of ancient burial sites remain undiscovered simply because history lost track of them by accident, through the slow erosion of memory across centuries. This is different. This is a secret that was built, engineered deliberately by an empire at the absolute height of its power, using every tool available to a civilization in the 13th century, human sacrifice according to legend, herds of horses, diverted rivers, forests planted specifically to conceal, and an armed exclusion zone maintained for 800 consecutive years across the rise and fall of dynasties, empires, and entire political systems. That the secret has held this long against the combined efforts of grave robbers, Soviet scientists, obsessive amateur historians, and modern satellites capable of resolving only BX smaller than a house from orbit, says something remarkable about how seriously the Mongols took this final act of devotion to their founder. Genghis Khan spent his life making sure the world would never forget him. In death, his people made sure the world would never quite find him either. Whether that tension between legacy and secrecy is ever finally resolved may depend less on the next generation of scanning technology and more on whether anyone believes it should be resolved at all. If you found this as fascinating as I did digging into it, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we're covering more of history's greatest unsolved mysteries every week. Drop a comment below and let me know. Do you think the tomb should ever be excavated if it's found, or should it stay hidden forever out of respect for Mongolian tradition? Give this video a thumbs up if you want to see more deep dives like this one, and share it with someone who loves a good historical mystery. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.